You are being taxed every single day, and you don't even know it. It is not an income tax. It is not a sales tax. It is something far more invisible, far more insidious, and far more devastating. It does not show up on your payslip. No politician will ever stand at a podium and admit to it. And yet right now, at this very second, it is quietly draining your savings, shrinking the value of every hour you work, and stealing your future right out from under you. This is the hidden tax of inflation. It is the oldest trick in the book, a financial weapon that governments have wielded against their own people for thousands of years. We are taught to believe that inflation is just a weather pattern, something that just happens to the economy like a storm or a drought. But that is a lie. Inflation is the quiet thief of wealth. It eats your savings, it shrinks your paycheck, and most importantly, it acts as a massive silent transfer of value from ordinary working-class citizens to the government and the financial elites who know how to play the game. It is the most convenient form of taxation ever invented because it does not require your consent. You never voted for it. You never signed a bill authorizing it. And here is the brutal truth that the history books often gloss over. Inflation is not an accident. It is a choice. It is a deliberate tool. It is a calculated strategy for governments to fund themselves without the political pain of raising taxes openly. To understand how you are being robbed today, we have to look at the crime scene where it all began. Let's go back to Rome. The Roman Empire, the greatest superpower of the ancient world, built its economy on the silver denarius. This coin was trusted across the Mediterranean. If you held a denarius, you knew exactly what you held, a specific weight of pure silver. It was honest money. But empires are expensive. Wars cost money. Massive public works projects cost money. Buying the loyalty of the army cost money. The emperors faced a dilemma that every politician faces today. How do you pay for things when you've run out of money? You have two choices. You can raise taxes, which makes the people angry and risks a revolt, or you can cut spending, which makes the army and the bureaucracy angry. The Roman emperors chose a third option. They decided to cheat. They discovered that instead of raising taxes, they could simply recall the coins, melt them down, and mix in cheaper base metals like copper. They would keep the same face of Caesar stamped on the front. They would keep the same official value. They pretended nothing had changed, but everything had changed. The silver content dropped from 100% to 90%, then 70%, then 50%. By the time the empire was collapsing, the silver coin was barely silver at all. It was a copper slug with a thin wash of silver that rubbed off on your fingers. At first, nobody noticed. It felt like free money for the state. But over time, the markets reacted. Merchants realized the coins were trash. Prices soared. Trust collapsed. The economy shifted backward to barter because nobody wanted the currency. The empire's money was debased. This was a hidden tax on every single citizen who held Roman coin, imposed without a single public decree. Rome fell, but the trick survived. The playbook of debasement was passed down through history, and every time a government gets desperate, they reach for it. Fast forward to revolutionary France in the 1790s. The government was broke, desperate, and surrounded by enemies. They didn't have silver mines, but they had printing presses. They issued paper notes called assignats, which were supposedly backed by the immense value of confiscated church lands. It sounded like a solid plan. It looked like financial innovation, but the temptation was too strong. When the state needed more money, they didn't collect taxes. They just printed more notes. Then more. Then more. The value of the currency didn't just dip, it evaporated. Bread riots erupted in the streets of Paris not because there was no bread, but because the money used to buy it was worthless. Farmers refused to sell their grain for paper. ordinary families saw generations of savings vanish into thin air. The government hadn't raised a single tax rate. They had simply inflated the money supply, stealing quietly from every citizen who was foolish enough to trust the paper in their pocket. And then there's the most infamous nightmare of them all, Weimar Germany. This is the story everyone knows, but few understand the true horror of. After World War I, crushed by reparations and debt, the German government decided to print its way out of trouble. The scale of this disaster is almost impossible to comprehend. By 1923, the currency was losing value not by the year or by the month, but by the hour. Workers demanded to be paid twice a day. Why? Because if they waited until 5 p.m. to get their wages, the price of a loaf of bread would have doubled since lunch. People would rush to the shops immediately after getting paid, desperate to exchange their melting money for anything tangible: soap, sausages, hairpins, anything that would hold value. There are stories of housewives taking wheelbarrows full of cash to the bakery. They would leave the wheelbarrow outside for a moment, and when they came back, they found the money dumped on the ground and the wheelbarrow stolen. The wheelbarrow had real value, the money was trash. Children played with stacks of banknotes like Legos because the paper was cheaper than actual toys. A lifetime of savings, money that represented decades of hard work, sweat, and sacrifice, was obliterated in weeks. The hidden tax had become an outright confiscation. But here is the dark truth that links Rome, France, and Germany to the dollars in your bank account today. Governments around the world watched these disasters. They watched Rome fall. They watched the guillotine in France. They watched the chaos in Germany. And the lesson they learned wasn't that inflation is dangerous. The lesson they learned was that inflation is powerful. They realized that if you can control it, if you can keep it from becoming hyperinflation, it is the most politically convenient tax in the world. Think about it from the perspective of a government with massive debt. When governments borrow, spend, and print, they are running up a tab. But unlike you, they control the value of the currency they use to pay that tab. If a government owes $1 trillion and they cause inflation, the real value of that debt shrinks. They pay back old debts with devalued money. The hidden tax erodes their obligations. Creditors suffer, savers suffer, but the state survives. And the best part for them? Ordinary people don't march in the streets against inflation the way they march against tax hikes. If the government announced tomorrow that they were taking 10% of everyone's savings account to pay off the national debt, there would be a revolution by sunset. But if the government prints money and causes 10% inflation, the result is exactly the same. You lose 10% of your purchasing power. But nobody marches, nobody riots, because the theft feels diffuse. It feels confusing. It feels hard to pin down. You don't get an inflation bill in the mail. You just notice your rent is a little higher. Your groceries are a little pricier. Your salary just doesn't seem to stretch as far as it used to. You blame the greedy landlord or the supermarket or the gas station. You rarely blame the central bank. That is by design. The British Empire knew this game well. During both World Wars, Britain financed vast military campaigns not just through taxes and borrowing, but through controlled inflation. The Bank of England printed, prices crept upward, and ordinary citizens quietly shouldered the cost of the war through the devaluation of their earnings. After the war, politicians celebrated victory. Parades were held, but household savers discovered their pounds bought far less than before. Inflation is patriotic theft disguised as shared sacrifice. The 20th century perfected this mechanism. In the United States, inflation quietly eroded the massive debt pile after World War II. Politicians called it growth, but much of that recovery was simply the silent shrinking of wartime obligations through rising prices. And then came the moment that changed everything. The moment the safety net was cut. 1971.
When President Nixon severed the US dollar's link to gold in 1971, the last anchor of restraint was cut loose. Before this, money had to be tied to something real. Governments couldn't just print endlessly because they needed the gold to back it up. But Nixon ended that. From that day forward, governments had an unlimited license to inflate. We entered the era of fiat currency, money backed by nothing but faith and government decree.
Inflation became the quiet normal. It became a feature, not a bug. Think about your own life right now. You are told to save. You are told to be responsible. So you deposit money in a bank account, earning maybe 1% interest if you're lucky. But inflation is running at 3%, 4%, or 5%. Do the math. You are losing purchasing power every single year. You are guaranteed to lose. That lost value doesn't just vanish into the ether. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transferred. So where does your wealth go? It transfers. It transfers to borrowers whose debts shrink in real terms. It transfers to the government, whose deficits become easier to finance. And most significantly, it transfers to asset holders. This is the secret that the wealthy know and the working class ignores. Inflation is a redistribution scheme masquerading as economics. It moves wealth from the many who hold cash to the few who hold assets. When the money supply expands, the money doesn't get distributed equally to everyone at the same time. This is known as the Cantillon effect. The new money goes to the government and the banks first. They get to spend it while it still has full value. They use it to buy assets, to bid up prices. By the time that money trickles down to your wages, prices have already risen. The elite get the gold, you get the higher prices. The 1970s made this painfully visible. In America, inflation surged into double digits. Families saw the value of savings melt away. Mortgage rates soared. Workers demanded wage hikes just to keep up, but they were always a step behind. The hidden tax became so obvious that the public finally woke up. It got so bad that Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker had to do the unthinkable. He inflicted a brutal recession by raising interest rates to nearly 20% to crush the inflation monster. It worked, but the cost was immense. Businesses closed. Millions lost jobs. The medicine was worse than the disease. And yet the deeper lesson lingered. Inflation is always paid for by ordinary people. Governments love inflation because it's a stealth weapon, but they also fear it because when the hidden tax grows too large, the illusion breaks. That is why they constantly downplay it. They massage the statistics. They change the calculation formulas. They take things out of the consumer price index to make the number look smaller. Ask yourself, when your grocery bill doubles in a decade, but official inflation is reported at only 2% a year, who benefits from that lie? Who benefits from you thinking you aren't losing as much as you actually are? The most revealing modern example of this heist came in 2008. When the global financial system collapsed, governments didn't let the bad banks fail. They bailed them out. They printed trillions of dollars. They called it quantitative easing. It sounds technical, boring, safe. But for Wall Street, it was salvation. For ordinary savers, it was theft. This flood of new money didn't go into your paycheck. It went into assets. The stock market exploded. Real estate prices in major cities doubled, then tripled. Luxury goods soared. The wealth gap didn't just widen, it became a canyon. Inflation didn't show up immediately in the price of milk, it showed up in the price of a house. It made the rich richer and the poor further behind. The hidden tax had changed form, but it was still the same trick. Devalue the currency, punish the savers, reward the asset holders. Then came 2020. When the pandemic struck, the printers went into overdrive. We're talking about printing on a scale never seen in human history. Stimulus checks, bailouts, corporate rescues, trillions upon trillions of dollars created out of thin air in a matter of months. For a brief moment, it felt like magic. Free money, debt suspended. But there is no such thing as a free lunch. By 2021 and 2022, the bill came due. Inflation roared back with a vengeance. Energy bills doubled, food prices surged, housing costs spiked to impossible levels. And once again, look at who won and who lost. If you owned real estate, if you owned stocks, your net worth on paper went up. But if you were a renter, if you were living paycheck to paycheck, you got crushed. Your wages might have gone up a little, but the cost of staying alive went up a lot more. Inflation was the tax that nobody voted for, but everyone paid. This pattern is global. Look at Argentina. Decades of overspending and printing have turned inflation into a way of life. Families rush to spend pesos the second they get them before they lose value. Entire generations grow up distrusting their own money. Look at Lebanon. Between 2019 and 2021, the currency collapsed by 90%. Doctors, engineers, retirees, the entire middle class watched a lifetime of hard work vanish in months. Different places, different leaders, but always the same trick. Sometimes economists try to gaslight you. They try to dress it up as good inflation. They will tell you that a target of 2% inflation is healthy. They say it encourages spending and keeps the economy dynamic. But translate that into plain English. What they are saying is, it is healthy for your savings to lose 2% of their value every year so that you are forced to spend them. Even so-called good inflation means your money is melting slowly in the background like an ice cube in a warm room. It might not be hyperinflation, but it's still erosion. It is still a hidden tax. The difference is only the speed of the theft. So, how do you protect yourself? If the game is rigged, how do you stop losing? History offers the answers. In Rome, the survivors weren't those holding the debased copper coins. The survivors were those who hoarded real silver and gold. In Weimar Germany, those with foreign currency or physical land weathered the storm while cash savers were wiped out. In the 1970s, those who held hard assets, real estate, commodities, businesses, preserved their wealth as cash burned away. The pattern is always the same. Inflation punishes the trusting. It punishes the passive. It punishes the savers. It rewards the prepared. It rewards the liquid. It rewards the asset holders. We have to accept a harsh reality. Governments will keep using this tool. They have to. The alternative, raising taxes openly and cutting spending, is politically impossible. No politician wants to stand up and tell voters we're broke and we're taking more of your paycheck to fix it. It is far easier to let the printers run and let inflation do the dirty work silently. They will tell you inflation is temporary. They will insist it is under control. They will redefine how it is measured. They will invent new, complicated words like modern monetary theory to make it sound technical and necessary rather than predatory. But in the end, the math doesn't change. Inflation is a tax. It is the oldest, most effective, and most unfair tax in human history. So the next time you see prices rise and you see politicians shrug, remember, it is not an accident. It is not a mystery. It is a policy, and you are the one paying for it. The system is designed to take from you slowly, day by day. The only way to win is to understand the game, to stop trusting the paper in your pocket as a store of value, and to own things that cannot be printed away. The answers aren't hidden in the future, they are written in the past.